so many topics to talk about with you, but let's go back to the beginning. I mean, obviously you had a bit of a past before the Buggles, but you go and make a record. Video Killed the Radio Stars. Worldwide smash. I believe it was the first record ever played on MTV, and then you kind of quit.
Well, it's a bit naff being an artist, isn't it? You get dragged all over Europe. You have to mime to the same record all the time, and you don't even get to play. And by the time you get to the sort of 100th interview, where people ask you, how did you get this name, the Buggles? You're kind of a bit fed up of it. And also, in 1980, the recording studio was a much more exciting place than live. Live was kind of boring. But studios were, the equipment was all changing. It was fascinating.
Dollar, funnily enough, was probably the big breakthrough for you as a producer. I think when the world kind of really noticed Trevor Horn. Tell us about Dollar.
Well, Dollar were like a funny little act. There was two of them, David Van Day and Teresa Bazar, and they were very sweet, and they had a few pop hits, and it was the first thing that my late wife got me to produce. She said, you should be a producer, and you should produce this group Dollar, and I was like, well, I've just been the singer in Yes, what am I going to do, produce Dollar?
Which was quite weird, because it was straight up kind of sugary pop, done by this guy that was actually involved with Yes, this kind of scary progressive rock group.
Yeah, but what was interesting about it was Paul Morley had spotted that it was a new kind of record, and they were the first knockings of a whole new thing that was about to come. And but Dollar got me ABC, and of course ABC put me on the map.
The other record, it was actually the first record I ever got to play on Radio 1. When I was a guest on Peter Powell's show, was Buffalo Girls, which you worked with the great Malcolm McLaren. Tell us how that came about and what it was like.
Well, after ABC, I was going to do...
Two control freaks working together.
Actually, I don't think Malcolm was that kind of a control freak. Malcolm wanted to do a solo album, and I was I met him and I was intrigued because he told me that DJs scratched records in New York, and I was like, what? And he was like, yeah, they do this, wooka wooka wooka. And I was, really? And then he played me a tape of them doing just that, and that sort of blew my mind a little bit. I never heard anything like that. And so even though he couldn't sing and he couldn't play, I sort of signed on to make an album with him, and we ended up going right around the world. And we ended up in Nashville recording a song called Buffalo Gals, which is an old square dancing song. And I remember saying to him, you keep on about making a sort of scratching record about E.T. or something. Why don't we make a scratching record of Buffalo Girls? I only said it because I was pretty desperate, because he told me the Buffalo Girls was the single, and there was no way that I could see that, some hokey country piece of cornbread would ever do anything in the charts. And I was aware of my reputation as a hit producer, so I was desperate to get a hit. And I thought maybe somehow we could combine the two things.
JJ, I can never pronounce his surname.
Jęczalek.
But he used to have this thing called the Fairlight.
That was it,
which was basically the most sophisticated, most expensive sampling machine. I mean, you just couldn't. I remember we were just talking outside. I mean, you could never. Trevor was one of the only people that kind of actually could work out how to use this thing, and they were really expensive, right?
Yeah, it cost £18,000 in 1982. I remember, because my late wife was pretty upset about it. It's like, do you really have to have this? I was like, God, I really do, because it's what's happening. It's the future,
And how long was the sampling time on it?
I think you had 8 seconds, and the longest bit could be, the longest sample could be a quarter of a second. But JJ had ways of fiddling it.
So instead of actually kind of recording bass guitars and violins, I always remember that you started recording like...
Yeah, anything. That.
Right. And that's what he got obsessed. That's what he became known for, right?
Yeah. Cash registers.
The sound of breaking glass.
Sound of breaking glass. Yeah. Sound of cash registers. All kinds of things. And nobody could figure out what was going on, because people had heard sound effects before, but nobody could understand how we could manipulate them that way until they began to understand sampling. But it took for about 2 years, there was a sort of a twilight time where it was all changing, and hardly anybody had the gear. So nobody really knew what was going on apart from me, and I wasn't very sure myself.
You were a hot producer. It was always about being involved with the next big thing, having your next hit, keeping that all going. And then you go off and do this band that is so abstract and so opposite to, I mean, there were no songs really. There was it was the art of noise, and it was into the battle, and it was, you kind of deconstructed music and started creating things that actually were, I think were really like the foundations of hip hop as well, in terms of what people started sampling.
Yeah, I remember the first time I played my friends Moments in Love, and they said it's really boring. And I was like, it's kind of meant to be boring. It's not like you to make boring records. Well, I was saying it's meant to be a boring record. It's meant to be like 10 minutes long, you know? I mean, in a sort of naive way, I was thinking of something that you could have sex to. I suppose it was because I thought sex was 10 minutes long.
And talk about beatbox, because that, again, another seminal track. I think it wasn't a beatbox, though, was it? It was actually the guy from Yes.
It was a guy from Yes. It was the thing about beatbox was the first ever digital drum loop. I don't think anybody done a digital drum loop before that. And it actually came from, when I was in New York with Malcolm McLaren, I met Afrika Bambaataa. So when it introduced me to him in a club, and I just heard his record, he just had
Planet Rock.
Planet Rock, yeah. And you know, there was a lot of noise going on, and I said to him, you know, for want of a better question, who's your favorite band? And he said, The Guess Who. I was like, The Guess Who? The Guess Who actually were a Canadian band that turned it to Bachman Turner Overdrive.
Yeah, of course.
And he said, yeah, man, I've got this great live album, and the drum breaks on it are brilliant. It's just the drums he likes, it's not the band. And it always stuck with me. So when we came up with that, when JJ played me the drum loop of Alan that became beatbox, I said, fucking great, man, call it beatbox. People are going to love that. And he said, but don't we have to put some music on it? And I was like, not much, you know?
Let's go back to ZTT and the manifesto behind the label and everything. What were your thoughts at the time? What did you set out to do? What was going to be different about ZTT as opposed to producing records for Island or?
That's a good question. What was going to be? We tried some different things that other people hadn't tried. For a kickoff, we were the first record label in England to sign a German band, Propaganda,
yeah.
and actually have some sort of success with it. I think for the first couple of years it was great because we had an audience. It was like we had an audience and people were interested in us.
It was almost like a fan club.
Yes.
There was a certain amount. Certainly from the outside, it felt like a very anarchistic kind of place.
Yeah.
But you don't strike me as a particularly anarchistic kind of guy.
No, not really.
It's
no,
all Paul's fault. So tell us about Frankie Goes to Hollywood. How they came to you. How you found them.
Well, I was working on 90125 with Yes, and we had a big argument about something, about one of the guys was 5 hours late. And so there was a really bad vibe because I was angry because they'd been giving me a hard time because the studio was £100 an hour, and then one of them was 5 hours late, 500 quid down the drain. So we're all sitting watching the TV, not talking, and it's the Tube, and Frankie Goes to Hollywood come on. And Chris Squire said, that's the kind of, why don't you sign that band to your record label? And I was like, fuck off. I was in such a bad temper. But I thought about them, and the drummer had registered with me a little bit because he was an unusual looking guy. And then I was driving home, and David, used to be called Kid, but doesn't like to be called Kid anymore, Jensen, played Relax, the Frankie demo of Relax. And I thought
there was a version before you got involved.
Oh, yes. It wasn't released. But I heard it. I thought, geez, that's a hit. I know that's a hit.
The production of Relax is just quite remarkable. It is like an epic movie in everything about it, about the way it sounded, about what was on it, about its length. I think it was incredibly long.
Well, the single was 4 minutes, but there was a sex mix that was 14 minutes long, which was just us messing around with the record. But it was, yeah, it was.
How long did it take you to make it?
Well, it took me probably in the end. It took about 2 months because I made it.
2 months to make the one song.
Yeah, but I made it sort of 3 times and scrapped it 3 times, and then the final version, I think I started on a Tuesday and finished it on a Friday. We did it really quickly once we'd figured out what we were doing. But you see, there was a new piece of gear, and it was, you know, if anybody's a gearhead, there was a thing called a conductor, and it was the first time ever you could lock a drum machine to a Fairlight, and Relax was like the first record that we did like that.
Certainly from a DJing point of view and from programming radio shows, you were creating soundscapes that were making radio more exciting. You know, it was actually an event to actually play the records on the radio. The Relax, of course, then got banned. Talk about that.
Yeah, but that was Paul Morley, because he put a load of stuff on the single that we never even saw till it went out, about lick the shit off my boots or something like that.
Because it actually was starting getting played, then it got pulled, right? It wasn't.
Yeah,
like there was,
but they pulled it when it got to number 2, so it was perfect timing.
It just added to the hype.
There was just no way it wasn't going to get to number 1 after that.
The other massively significant record, I think, for everyone in this room and for kind of the dance music historically is "Slave to the Rhythm,"
Right.
which came after kind of this period. A round of applause for "Slave to the Rhythm." I mean, another absolutely incredible record. We could do the whole seminar just about the making of that record. How did you come to get together with Grace Jones?
Chris Blackwell. We had a song that we'd sort of done with the Frankies called "Slave to the Rhythm," and it hadn't worked out because I thought it was a good song. And Chris Blackwell said, "Why don't you do it with Grace Jones as a single for her greatest hits?" And that's what we made the record.
It's got your DNA all over it, though. I think certainly again from a radio perspective, it was like everyone was waiting for what Frankie would do next, but you kind of gave it to them with that record because it did sound it.
It wasn't a very big hit. That's the funny thing, but people still like it. People still want to talk about it.
Okay, let's talk. I'm just conscious of the clock. I've got to talk to you about Psalm Studios.
Right.
You know, it's sad part of musical heritage is great studios are closing. I used to have a room at Olympic. I think Psalm is one of the last, you know, I think there's Abbey Road, Air, and Psalm, probably the last 3 great studios in the UK.
Yeah.
Tell us how you found Psalm at the start and what it was.
Well, my late wife's family owned studios, and they used to own Psalm East. And when I came into the family, I wanted to, I wanted free studio time and stuff, which I never got. And I wanted shares in the studio, which I never got. But at a certain point in 1982, Chris Blackwell offered if I'd start a record label, which became ZTT. He said he offered to sell me Basing Street, which is the old Island Studios. And so we made it into a Psalm family business.
It was full of bodies or something when you walked in at the beginning. It was
well, originally they used to make all of the models for Madame Tussauds, and the place in the alleyway was where they cast them, where they melted all the wax, and they were all stacked in the church. So it literally looked like a load of bodies.
If you ever get a chance to go, Studio One is one of the great spaces in the world, I think. I was thinking back, and I was looking it up before we started, but apart from Band-Aid, which obviously everyone's seen the video, the making of that song, I mean, Bob Marley, Jay-Z and Beyonce recently, Justin Bieber, Timberlake, Jimi Hendrix, I mean, goes all extremes.
Yeah, it goes all the way back.
It should be like a museum.
Well, I thought about that, but, nobody's interested in recording studio museums. They
I don't
aren't.
think so, they're not.
No, not really.
You get sentimental about it? Yeah, I remember the other thing that you was it true that there was a day you walked into Studio One, which also had the incredible SSL desk, which I think you almost did more to market the SSL console than any other producer I can think of.
In the 80s, yeah.
And but this was your beautiful room where so much history had been created musically, and you saw someone actually just cutting a track off a laptop that was sitting on the top of the desk.
Oh, no, that was what I was saying. Yeah, you have a 96-channel wraparound desk that costs nearly £400,000, and your customer is working on a laptop with plugins, and just using the monitors. But
and you thought that was the beginning of the end.
Yeah, absolutely. But the good thing is that what the person was enjoying was the acoustics of the room. And even though Psalm's closing down, we're actually opening, I think it's how many, 12, 13 new rooms.
So like production suites and stuff like
Well, they're not just production suites. They're sort of a cut above. It's a combination of production suites, mixing rooms, all put together with communal space. You know, so that because I don't know about anybody else, but I kind of like going out the studio and bumping into other people. I've always enjoyed it, and I've bumped into all sorts of people in the studios, and all kinds of stuff's happened. You
So
know?
it's the community that's really important.
I mean, I think we were partly responsible for getting Take That back together again, because I was working with Robbie and Gary was in the other room, and they bumped into each other. You know? I did warn him that they were there, but people mingle a lot. You know, it's a very, you know, making records, especially if you're in your bedroom, you know, making dance records, or if you're in your studio, you spend a long time in a tiny room. It's nice to go out of the room into a nice space and rub shoulders with people. I've always liked that. So you know, we've done that. We've got 2 new locations. One of them's both of them are only like 3 minutes away from Sarm.
Trevor Horn, thank you.
Thank you very
For
much.
coming to the IMS.